Except for one brief reference in the newer ending of the gospel we call Mark, the only descriptions of the Ascension in the canonical writings appear in the two readings that we have today. Scripture scholars believe that these two books, the gospel we have named Luke and the Acts of the Apostles, were penned by the same author. This seems to be somewhat obvious since the writer begins the Acts of the Apostles this way. In the first book, Theophilus, I dealt with all that Jesus did and taught until the day he was taken up. In the second book, the writer describes the ascension scene and then goes on to chronicle the story of the disciples as they continue to spread the gospel message and form Christian communities of believers. Today's gospel passage from Luke is the very, very end of the gospel. And it is interesting that this gospel ends in the very same place where it began, in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. After another brief introduction to Theophilus, the gospel begins with the story of Zechariah in the temple and the revelation to him about the birth of John the Baptist. And the gospel ends in the very same physical space where Zechariah worshiped, with the disciples continually in the temple, praising God. Although there is much more detail in the passage from Acts, and there is a major discrepancy in the timing about what time the ascension actually took place, there are some consistent themes in both versions. In both, Jesus, before he is lifted up into the clouds or up into heaven, there is his promise of the coming of the power from on high. This strong imagery is a commitment to the idea that Jesus is a prophet, a major one whose power is passed on. It is a reflection of the story of the powerful prophet Elijah, who was taken up in a whirlwind, and his prophetic power and spirit, symbolized by his cloak, are passed on to his disciple Elisha. Similarly, Jesus is taken up to heaven, and his spirit and prophetic power are passed on to his disciples, who return to Jerusalem with great joy and who were continually in the temple praising God. Another important similarity is that in both versions, Jesus calls upon his disciples to be witnesses. You will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, throughout Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. In the Acts version, two white-robed messengers appear with a very important question. Why are you standing there looking up at the sky? This is a very important question. If they are to be Jesus' witnesses, why are they just standing there looking at the sky? This is very reminiscent of the Transfiguration earlier in this also Gospel of Luke. The white-robed Moses and Elijah appear in glory with Jesus. Peter wants to build tents and stay atop the mountain, but Jesus brings them down from the mountain top, down into the valleys where the real work of witnessing needs doing. The same thing is happening here. The messengers ask why the disciples are just standing there gazing upward when they should be looking about them for the witnessing and the work that needs doing. Bringing Jesus' love to people, taking care of the needs of the poor, the hungry, the homeless, the marginalized, the troubled, and on and on. The reading from Ephesians fits so well into this theme. May the eyes of your hearts be enlightened. Our hearts are not merely ventricles and valves. The essence of who we are, our spiritual hearts, have ears to hear God speaking to us, and ears to hear the cry of the poor. Our spiritual hearts have eyes to see the suffering and injustice in our world. And our hearts, which know the great love that God has for us, have received the power from on high, so that we may have the courage and the strength to be effective witnesses for Christ and for God's love. The title of a recent TED Talk offered here at Pleasant Hill, "Don't Believe Everything That You Think," enticed me into attending. The speaker gave me some insight into why we might often stand by looking up at the sky instead of taking effective action. She began with a video clip of an adult elephant, which was strong enough to uproot a large tree with its trunk and cast it aside as if it were merely a branch. She then showed another adult elephant, standing meekly, tethered to a tree by a slender rope. Why, she asked, does this elephant not exercise its power to break the rope and roam more freely? The explanation is found in the way the elephant is treated when it is very young. It is tethered to a tree by a rope, which it strains against to break so it can be more free. But at this age, it does not have the strength to break the rope. After repeated tries, it eventually comes to believe that it is not capable of breaking the rope. As it matures, it carries this belief with it. Although perfectly capable as an adult, it still believes that it is powerless. The speaker then applied this question to the audience. What ropes from past experience or upbringing are keeping us tethered to inaction? What have you been told in the past that causes you to feel ineffective or incapable? What are you afraid to do because you don't think it can be done? Near the beginning of Luke's Gospel, we are reminded that nothing is impossible with God. Notice, it doesn't say for God, but with God. At the end of this same gospel, we are promised power from on high. God will be with us, empowering us to do the work we are called to do. In the words of the poet Mary Oliver, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Well, we are not called to stand idly by looking at the sky. We have been given power from on high. We are called to be witnesses to the love of God in our lives and to bring that love to others. Why are we standing here looking at the sky?